If you looked at the horizon on this particular morning, you would have seen something that looked like a mistake. Floating off the coast of Samar were 13 American ships, but they weren't warships, not really. They were the runts of the U.S. Navy. There were 6 escort carriers, slow, clumsy cargo ships that had been converted to carry a few airplanes. They were so thin-skinned that the sailors joked their class designation, CVIE, stood for combustible, vulnerable, expendable. Protecting them were 3 destroyers and 4 destroyer escorts. These were the tin cans, ships so small they bobbed in the wake of the larger vessels. This unit was called Taffy 3. Their job was boring. They were supposed to patrol the rear area, hunting for submarines and supporting the troops on the beach. They were never meant to fight a surface battle. But at 06:45 a.m., a pilot flying a routine patrol looked to the northwest and his blood ran cold. Breaking through the morning mist was a dark shape, then another, then another. Pagoda masts, massive gun turrets, forests of anti-aircraft guns. The pilot keyed his radio, his voice cracking with panic. Enemy surface force, I see battleships, I repeat battleships. The American admiral on the flagship didn't believe him. He radioed back, check your identification, there are no Japanese battleships near here. The pilot screamed back, damn it, I can see the pagoda masts, I see the biggest meatball flag on Earth. He wasn't lying. Bearing down on the tiny ships of Taffy 3 was the Japanese center force. It was the most powerful surface fleet Japan had ever assembled. 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, 11 destroyers. And leading the formation was the monster itself, the Yamato. The largest, heaviest, and most powerful warship ever built in the history of mankind. The math was sickening. The Yamato alone weighed more than all 13 American ships combined. A single shell from the Yamato weighed 3,000 pounds, the same weight as a sedan car. The American ships were armed with 5-inch guns. Their shells weighed 55 pounds. It was a fleet of lions attacking a herd of sheep. The American commanders knew that within 30 minutes, Taffy 3 would be annihilated. But the Japanese made one mistake. They didn't know who was commanding the lead American destroyer. Meet Commander Ernest Evans. If you were casting a movie about a naval hero, you would cast him. He was born in Pawnee, Oklahoma. His father was white, his mother was Cherokee. Evans was proud of his Native American heritage. He grew up hearing stories of warriors who fought to the death, and he carried that spirit into the U.S. Naval Academy. At Annapolis, he faced prejudice, he faced bullying, but Evans didn't care. He was tough as rawhide and had a low tolerance for nonsense. In 1943, he was given command of a brand new destroyer, the USS Johnston, DD 557. At the commissioning ceremony in front of his entire crew, Evans didn't give a polite speech about duty and honor. He took the microphone, looked his men in the eye, and said this. This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way, and anyone who doesn't want to go along had better get off right now. Nobody got off. But as they stood on the deck that morning, looking at the Japanese battleships on the horizon, many of them probably wished they had. The situation was dire. The American carriers were slow, their top speed was only 18 knots. The Japanese battleships could do 30. There was no running away. The Japanese would catch them in minutes and slaughter them. The American commander, Admiral Clifton Sprague, ordered the carriers to turn east and launch their planes. He ordered the destroyers to make smoke, to burn oil in their smokestacks to hide the fleeing carriers. It was a defensive move, a desperate attempt to buy time. But Ernest Evans didn't do defensive. On the bridge of the Johnston, Evans watched the massive geysers of water erupting around the carriers as the Japanese battleships found their range. He knew that smoke wasn't enough. Someone had to disrupt the Japanese aim. Someone had to make them flinch. Evans didn't wait for orders. He didn't radio for permission. He turned to his helmsman and gave a command that should have been impossible. Left full rudder, all engines ahead flank. The USS Johnston broke formation. While every other ship was running away, the Johnston turned around and charged straight at the entire Japanese Navy. Imagine the scene. A 2,000-ton destroyer bouncing over the waves, rushing toward a 70,000-ton battleship. It looked ridiculous. It was like a puppy attacking a grizzly bear. But Evans knew what he was doing. He knew he couldn't sink the Yamato with his guns. His 5-inch shells would just bounce off the battleship's armor like ping-pong balls. But he had one weapon that could hurt them: torpedoes. The Johnston carried 10 Mark 15 torpedoes. But to use them, Evans had to get close, suicidally close. The torpedoes had a range of 10,000 yards. The Japanese battleships could shoot him from 20,000 yards. That meant Evans had to survive a 10,000-yard zone of death, running a gauntlet of massive explosive shells just to get a shot off. The Japanese opened fire. The ocean boiled. When a 14-inch shell hits the water, it doesn't just splash. It creates a tower of water 200 feet high. The impact is so hard it feels like the ship has hit a reef. And the water wasn't white, it was green, it was yellow, it was pink. The Japanese used colored dye in their shells so that each ship could see where its own bullets were landing. The Johnston was zigzagging through a rainbow of lethal geysers. Evans stood on the open bridge, soaking wet, smoking a cigar, calmly shouting course corrections. "Chase the splashes," he yelled. He knew that naval gunners rarely hit the exact same spot twice in a row, so he steered the ship into the geysers of the last shell. For 10 agonizing minutes, the Johnston charged. 18,000 yards. 16,000 yards. 14,000 yards. The Japanese gunners couldn't believe it. This tiny American ship wasn't acting like a destroyer. It was acting like a cruiser. It was so aggressive that they thought they were fighting a much larger force. At 10,000 yards, Evans shouted, "Fire torpedoes." 10 steel fish dropped into the water. Evans turned the ship hard to evade the counterfire. The crew held their breath. Torpedoes are slow. It takes minutes for them to reach the target. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Then, boom! A massive column of fire erupted on the horizon. The Johnston's torpedoes had slammed into the heavy cruiser Kumano. The explosion was catastrophic. It blew the entire bow off the Japanese ship. The Kumano, one of the most powerful cruisers in the fleet, dragged to a halt, burning and crippled. A cheer went up from the deck of the Johnston. They had drawn first blood. The mouse had bitten the lion. But now the element of surprise was gone. Evans had kicked the hornet's nest. Every Japanese gun in the fleet, battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, turned its attention to the lone American ship. At 07:30 a.m., the Johnston's luck ran out. 3 massive 14-inch shells from the battleship Congo found their mark. The sound was like the world ending. The shells ripped through the thin armor like paper. They smashed into the after-engine room. The boilers exploded. Steam and oil sprayed everywhere. Men were scalded to death instantly. The speed of the ship dropped from 30 knots to 17. Seconds later, 3 more shells from a light cruiser hit the bridge. The explosion devastated the command center. It severed the steering cables. It destroyed the radar. On the bridge, Commander Evans was thrown against the bulkhead. The blast blew off his shirt and helmet. 2 fingers on his left hand were severed, hanging by threads of skin. Shrapnel was embedded in his chest and face. Most captains, wounded and crippled, would have ordered abandon ship. But Ernest Evans picked himself up off the deck. He wrapped a handkerchief around his mangled hand. He looked at his surviving officers. "I can't steer from here," he said. He ran to the aft of the ship, to the emergency steering gear. Standing on the open fantail, shouting orders down a hatch to men manually cranking the rudder, Evans kept fighting. "We aren't done yet," he told them. "We're going back in." Courage is contagious. Admiral Sprague, watching the Johnston charge alone, realized that Evans had bought them time. He keyed his mic and ordered the other tin cans to attack. The USS Hull and the USS Heermann turned their rudders. Then the even smaller destroyer escorts, the Samuel B. Roberts, joined the fray. The little wolves were attacking. It was a chaotic, swirling dogfight. Usually naval battles are fought at long range. This was a barroom brawl. The ships were so close that the Japanese battleships couldn't depress their guns low enough to hit the Americans. The shells were flying over the destroyers. The USS Samuel B. Roberts, commanded by Robert Copeland, charged a heavy cruiser. Copeland got on the loudspeaker and told his crew, "This will be a fight against overwhelming odds from which survival cannot be expected. We will do what damage we can." They fired their guns until the barrels melted. They fired star shells meant for illumination into the bridges of the Japanese ships, setting them on fire. They fired anti-aircraft machine guns at the hulls of battleships just to annoy them. But the Johnston, crippled and smoking, was still leading the dance. Evans, steering manually from the rear deck, saw a Japanese cruiser lining up to torpedo the American carriers. He realized he had no torpedoes left. He had almost no guns left. But he still had a ship. He maneuvered the broken Johnston directly into the line of fire. He placed his own ship between the Japanese cruiser and the carriers. He forced the Japanese ship to turn away. He was bluffing with an empty gun, and it was working. But the Johnston was dying. She was surrounded by 5 Japanese destroyers. They circled her like a firing squad. Here is the conclusion of the USS Johnston feature documentary script. She was surrounded by 5 Japanese destroyers. They circled her like a firing squad. It was no longer a battle, it was an execution. The Japanese destroyers closed in to 1,000 yards. They pumped shell after shell into the dying American ship. The Johnston was a wreck. Her masts were snapped. Her decks were ablaze. Her engines were dead. She was dead in the water, drifting helplessly in the path of the enemy. But even then, she bit back. A single 5-inch gun on the rear deck was still manually operational. A sailor named Robert H. Hagenson was firing it by hand, trying to hit the Japanese destroyers. He got off a few rounds before a Japanese shell hit the magazine beneath him, silencing the Johnston's voice forever. At 09:45 a.m., Commander Ernest Evans looked around his ship. There was nothing left to fight with. The ammo was gone, the power was gone, the ship was beginning to roll over. He gave the final order: all hands abandon ship. Men began jumping into the oil-slicked water. They scrambled onto life rafts or clung to floating debris. But Evans didn't jump. Nobody knows exactly what happened to him in those final minutes. Some say they saw him on the fantail, helping wounded men over the side. Others say he walked back to the bridge. But one thing is certain: Ernest Evans did not leave his ship. As the Johnston rolled over and began to sink by the bow, a Japanese destroyer, the Ukikaze, sailed slowly past the survivors in the water. The American sailors tensed up. They expected the Japanese to machine gun them in the water, a common atrocity in the Pacific War. They watched the Japanese destroyer train its guns on them. But the guns didn't fire. Instead, something incredible happened. As the Ukikaze passed the sinking Johnston, the Japanese captain walked out onto the wing of his bridge. He looked at the burning American ship. He stood at attention. And he saluted. He was saluting the courage of an enemy who had fought like a demon. Minutes later, the USS Johnston slipped beneath the waves, taking 186 men, including Commander Evans, down into the depths. The Johnston was gone, the Hull and Samuel B. Roberts were sinking, Taffy 3 was broken. The path to the American troop transports was wide open. The Yamato could have sailed right through and massacred thousands of soldiers. But then the miracle happened. At 12:36 p.m., Admiral Kurita, the commander of the Japanese fleet, gave a shocking order: all ships turn north. Kurita was confused, he was exhausted, and he was terrified. Because of the ferocity of the Johnston's charge, Kurita was convinced he wasn't fighting a small escort unit. He thought he was fighting the main American carrier fleet. He thought the aggression of the tin cans meant they were protecting massive battleships just over the horizon. He didn't want to walk into a trap, so he retreated. The Japanese center force turned around and went home. The sacrifice of Taffy 3 had worked. They had bluffed the most powerful fleet on Earth. It cost 1,500 American lives, but they saved tens of thousands. The survivors of Taffy 3 drifted in the ocean for 2 days. Like the crew of the Indianapolis, they faced sharks and dehydration, but they held on. When they were rescued, they told the story of the Cherokee captain who charged a battleship. Commander Ernest Evans was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. His citation reads, "The valiant fighting spirit of the USS Johnston will be forever an inspiration to all men of the United States Navy." For 77 years, the Johnston lay undisturbed in the dark. In 2021, a deep-sea expedition finally found her. She rests at a depth of 21,180 feet. That is 4 miles down. It is the deepest shipwreck ever discovered in human history, deeper than the Titanic, deeper than the Bismarck. When the cameras finally saw the wreck, the researchers were stunned. The ship was shattered, it was twisted. But the hull number 557 was still visible. And the gun turrets were trained to the side. Even in death, the Johnston was still aiming at the enemy. Ernest Evans kept his promise. He told his crew he would go in harm's way. He told them he would be a fighting ship. He didn't have the biggest guns, he didn't have the thickest armor. But on that morning in October, the tin can sailor proved that it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. The battle off Samar remains the U.S. Navy's finest hour. It was the day the runts of the litter stood their ground against giants and won. Now that the smoke has cleared and the guns have fallen silent, I want you to pause for a moment. I want us to strip away the noise of the battle and look at the raw, cold reality of what happened off the coast of Samar. If you feed the data of the battle off Samar into a modern military supercomputer, the result is always the same. It calculates the tonnage. It calculates the shell weight. It calculates the armor thickness and the maximum range. And every single time, the computer will tell you that the American fleet should have been annihilated with 100% certainty. The Yamato alone displaced more water than the entire American task force combined. The Japanese center force had enough firepower to level a city. Taffy 3 had enough firepower to annoy a destroyer. Mathematically, the USS Johnston shouldn't have lasted 5 minutes. It shouldn't have been a battle, it should have been a massacre. But the computer misses one variable, the one variable that cannot be measured in millimeters of steel or pounds of explosive, the human spirit. The story of the USS Johnston is not a story about naval tactics. It is a story about the triumph of will over reality. It is the ultimate proof that in life, the size of the dog truly does not matter. What matters, what only matters, is the ferocity of the bite. Commander Ernest Evans didn't look at the math. If he had, he would have run away. He looked at the enemy, he looked at his duty, and he decided that he simply refused to accept the inevitable. And because he refused to accept it, he changed it. Let's dissect the mind of Ernest Evans for a moment. What makes a man charge a battleship with a tin can? Most people, when faced with an overwhelming problem, have a flight response. It is biological. When a bear enters your cave, your brain screams at you to run. But Evans possessed a rare psychological trait known as the offensive spirit. At the Naval Academy, they teach captains to be prudent. They teach them to calculate risk. But Evans knew something that the Japanese Admiral Kurita did not. He knew that aggression creates an illusion of power. Think about the Japanese admiral. Admiral Kurita was sitting on the bridge of the most powerful ship in history. He should have felt invincible, but when he saw the Johnston charging him, he didn't feel powerful. He felt confused. He felt fear. Why? Because in the mind of the Japanese admiral, no sane person would attack him unless they had a trap. Evans used his own weakness as a weapon. By acting like a giant, he convinced the enemy that he was a giant. This is a profound lesson for us today. In our own lives, we often face Yamatos. Maybe your Yamato is a debt you can't pay. Maybe it's a diagnosis from a doctor. Maybe it's a broken marriage or a career that has hit a dead end. The math says you are going to lose. The odds are against you. The natural instinct is to curl up and wait for the end, to play defense, to make smoke and hide. But the Johnston teaches us that the only way to survive the impossible is to attack it. You don't wait for the problem to crush you. You steer into the geysers. You turn your rudder hard to left, you flank your engines, and you charge straight at the thing that scares you the most. You might not win. Evans didn't survive. But by attacking, you change the dynamic. You stop being a victim and you become a warrior. And sometimes, just sometimes, that aggression is enough to make the giant turn around and run. There is another phenomenon at play here. Courage is a virus, but so is cowardice. If the Johnston had turned and ran, the whole would have run. The Heermann would have run. The entire fleet would have scattered in panic, and the Japanese would have picked them off one by one like rabbits in a field. But Evans didn't run, and because he charged, the whole charged. Because the whole charged, the Samuel B. Roberts, a ship so small it was basically a floating bathtub, charged. One man's decision set the standard for 1,000 others. We often think of ourselves as isolated individuals. We think our actions don't matter to the people around us. But that is a lie. People are watching you. Your children are watching how you handle stress. Your coworkers are watching how you handle failure. Your friends are watching how you handle grief. If you crumble, you give them permission to crumble. But if you stand, if you hold the line, you give them permission to be brave. The sailors on the Samuel B. Roberts knew they were going to die. Their captain told them, survival cannot be expected. But they saw the Johnston burning on the horizon, still firing, and they said, if he can do it, so can we. Ernest Evans didn't just save the carriers. He saved the souls of every sailor in Taffy 3. He reminded them of who they were. He proved that leadership isn't about rank. It isn't about the stripes on your sleeve. Leadership is about going first. It's about being the first one to step into the fire. We must also look at the enemy. Why did the Japanese retreat? The battle off Samar is the greatest blunder in the history of the Imperial Japanese Navy. They had the victory in their hands and they threw it away. Why? Because of the fog of war, Admiral Kurita was exhausted. He had been under air attack for days. His nerves were shot. When the Johnston attacked, Kurita's mind played tricks on him. He didn't see a destroyer, he saw a cruiser. He didn't see smoke screens, he saw a trap. Evans broke the enemy's OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. By acting so crazily, so unexpectedly, Evans prevented the Japanese from processing reality. This tells us something important about our own enemies and our own obstacles. They are not as strong as they look. The Yamato looked invincible, but the man commanding it was flawed, tired, and scared. The obstacles in your life look invincible, but they have cracks, they have weak points. The giant is often just a scared man in a big ship, waiting for someone to call his bluff. Evans called the bluff. He proved that the perception of power is often more important than power itself. We cannot tell this story without honoring the heritage of the man at the center of it. Ernest Evans was half Cherokee. In the 1940s, Native Americans were often treated as second-class citizens. Evans faced bigotry. He faced people who thought he wasn't officer material. But Evans tapped into a lineage of warriors that went back centuries. When he took command of the Johnston, he didn't try to be a polite, textbook naval officer. He brought the spirit of the plains wars onto the deck of a modern destroyer. He famously said, "I intend to go in harm's way." That isn't Navy regulation speak. That is a warrior's creed. He understood that a ship is not a hotel. It is a weapon, and a weapon is useless if you keep it in the holster. In a time when America was divided by segregation and prejudice, a Native American captain led a crew of white, black, and Hispanic sailors into the history books. On that deck, race didn't matter. Politics didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the brotherhood of the fight. Evans unified his crew through sheer competence and grit. He didn't demand respect, he earned it by bleeding on the same deck they did. In 2021, an expedition finally found the wreck of the Johnston. She lies 4 miles deep. To give you a sense of scale, that is deeper than the Titanic. It is deeper than the Bismarck. It is one of the deepest shipwrecks ever discovered. Down there, the water pressure is crushing. It is pitch black. The temperature is near freezing. But when the lights of the submersible hit the wreck, the researchers saw something that made them weep. The ship is broken, the bridge is gone, but the hull number 557 is still proud and visible. And the guns are still trained outward. Even in death, 77 years later, the Johnston is still fighting. She is still standing guard. That wreck is more than just a pile of steel. It is a monument to the human capacity for sacrifice. It is a cathedral of courage, resting in the eternal darkness of the Philippine Trench. It reminds us that while steel rusts and bodies decay, the memory of a great deed is immortal. Ernest Evans is gone. His crew is gone. But as long as human beings value bravery, as long as we tell stories of the weak standing up to the strong, the USS Johnston will never truly sink. So, what do we take away from this? Why did you spend the last hour watching a story about a ship that sank 80 years ago? I think it's because we are starving for this kind of clarity. We live in a world that is gray. We live in a world of compromise. We live in a world where we are told to play it safe, to keep our heads down, to just get by. The story of Taffy 3 cuts through the noise like a 5-inch shell. It demands an answer from us. When your moment comes, and it will come, who will you be? Will you be the ship that turns and runs, or will you be the Johnston? Will you be the person who accepts defeat because the math says you can't win? Or will you be the person who says, survival is not expected, but we will do what damage we can? You don't need a warship to be a hero, you just need the Johnston mindset. It is the mindset that says, I will not yield. It is the mindset that says, I will protect what is mine no matter the odds. It is the mindset that says, left full rudder, all engines ahead flank. The Pacific Ocean is vast, it covers 1/3 of our planet. It is a graveyard for thousands of ships and airplanes, but there is one spot off the coast of Samar that is sacred. If you could go there today, you would see nothing but blue water. The oil slicks are gone, the smoke has cleared, the screams have faded, but if you listen closely to the wind, you can almost hear the order echoing across the waves. This is going to be a fighting ship. He kept his promise, and in doing so, he gave us a blueprint for how to live. Don't wait for the odds to be in your favor. Don't wait for permission. Run to the sound of the guns. The valiant fighting spirit of the USS Johnston will be forever an inspiration to all men of the United States Navy. This has been the story of the greatest mismatch in naval history. If this story ignited a fire in you, if it reminded you of the strength you carry inside, please leave a comment below with the ship's motto, all ahead flank. We read every single comment. We want to know what battle you are fighting today and how you are going to channel the spirit of Ernest Evans to win it. Subscribe to WWII Records. We are building an archive of the greatest stories ever told, and we want you on the deck with us. Until the next time, keep fighting.